in front of fetch, we can use await. This is going to wait for fetch to finish or for fetch to get a response from the backend and then go to the next line. Now, because we used await, we can save the response in a variable. So at the front, we'll create a variable, const, and call it response, and make it equal to this result. Next, remember that to get the data that's attached to the response, we need to use response.json. So down here, we're going to use response.json and brackets. Now remember that response.json is also a promise. So at the front, we can use await to wait for this promise to finish before going to the next line. So this will give us the data that's attached to the response, which should be the order that was created by the backend. So let's save this in a variable using const order equals. And finally, let's console.log the order to see what it looks like. So now let's save, and then we'll open the project and make sure you have some products in your cart. And then we'll click place order. And now we can check our console to see what the order looks like. And you'll see that we got an order object from the backend. It has an order ID, an order time, and the products in our order, including a delivery time and the quantity that we want. So we successfully used the backend to create a new order. Let's also check the network tab up here and open network. So I'll resize this to make it a little easier to read. And we'll search for the super simple URL. And then we'll find this request, orders, with a status 200, and we'll click it. So inside the details, you'll see that it was a post request sent to /orders, and the status code was 200, so it was successful. Inside the payload tab, this is what we sent to the backend, which is our cart. In the preview tab, this is what the backend sent back, an order object. And the response tab is the same thing. We got the order object back. So that's how a real-world website works. Instead of creating the order on the web page or on our computer, we send an HTTP request to the backend to create the order. Okay, now that we created an order, let's save it somewhere. We'll go back to our code, and on the left, inside the data folder, let's create a file for our orders. So we'll click inside this folder, and then click here to create a file, and let's name it orders.js, and press enter. At the top, let's create an array to contain all of our orders. We'll use const orders equals an empty array. And let's export this so we can use it in other files. Export. Next, let's create a function for adding an order to this array. So we'll create a function, add order, brackets and curly brackets, and we'll give this function an order object, and we're just going to add it to the array. Now for orders, we usually want the most recent order at the top. So we're going to add this order to the front of the array. To do that, we'll type the array name, orders, and use the method .unshift, brackets, and we'll give it the order. So this will add the order to the front of the array instead of the back. Finally, let's save our orders into local storage. So we'll create a function to save to local storage. Function save to storage. Brackets and curly brackets. And we'll run local storage dot set item brackets and a string. We'll use a local storage key orders, comma. And remember, local storage only supports strings, so we'll use JSON.stringify, brackets, orders. And now when we modify this array, we're going to save to storage and brackets. Finally, at the top, let's load the orders from storage. So here, we'll use local storage dot get item brackets the string orders. And remember that this will be a string, so we need to convert it back into an array using the code json.parse and brackets. Now, in the beginning, we're not going to have any orders saved in local storage. So we can give this a default value using or and an empty array. So if there's nothing in local storage, it's going to use this empty array as a default and save. So now let's use add order in the payment summary. So first, we'll export this function and save, and then open the payment summary again. And at the top, we're going to import that function. So here we'll import curly brackets, add order from a string, and we'll go into the data folder, which is data/orders.js. And we'll scroll back down. And now after we create an order from the backend, we're going to add it to the array and save it in local storage using the function add order brackets the order object and save. Now, if we go to our web page and click place order, this should create an order from the backend and save it in local storage. So now we can open our console and go to the console tab. And let's check if it's inside local storage using local storage dot get item brackets and a string orders, and press enter. And you'll see that we saved an order in local storage. If you ever want to remove the orders from local storage, you can use this code. Local storage dot remove item brackets and the string orders. Press enter and then refresh the page. Let's go back to our code and let's get some practice and add some error handling to this code. So at the top, for async await, we're going to use try catch. So we'll type try curly bracket and catch brackets and curly brackets. And catch gets a parameter called error. So now we're going to move our code inside try. We'll select this code and then right click, cut, inside try, right click and paste. And I'll create a new line. And now if we make a request and there's some sort of network error, that error will go down here and we'll run the code inside catch. So in here, let's display a message. Console dot log the string unexpected error. Try again later. The last step is after we create an order, we should go to the orders page. To do that, at the bottom here, we're going to use an object called window.location. Window.location is a special object provided by JavaScript, and it lets us control the URL at the top of the browser. If we change the location object, it will change the URL at the top. So let's give this a try. We'll go into our code and we'll type window.location. Now, location has a property called .href. This gives us the URL at the top of the browser. And if we change the href property, it will change the URL at the top of the browser. So we'll try that in our code. We're going to change .href and make it equal to the string orders.html. So this will replace everything after the slash here with orders.html. And this will open the orders.html file, which is at the bottom here. And this will open the orders page. By the way, orders.html is a file path. The current file is checkout.html because this code is running on the checkout page. So it starts from checkout.html and then looks for a file called orders.html beside it, which is this file here. And it loads this file in the browser. So now let's save. We'll open the project and then click Place Order. So it should create a new order using the backend, and it will take us to the orders page. So right now, we have a list of order objects, and that's all the data that we need to create this page. I'll leave generating the HTML and making this page interactive as exercises. So now let's check our tests to make sure that everything is still working. We'll open the tab for our tests, and I'll refresh just in case, and it looks good, and we'll save our changes into Git. We'll go to the Git section. Inside orders.js, we created some functions for saving our orders, and in paymentsummary.js, we made the place order button interactive, and we use the backend to create an order. Let's create a message describing these changes. Create order using the backend and commit. So we're going to learn one more thing in this lesson, and this is needed to create the tracking page. We're going to learn how to use URL parameters. So first, let's open our project, and we'll go back to the orders page. And on this page, we have these track package links beside the products. If we click this link, it will take us to the tracking page at tracking.html. However, right now this page is just plain HTML. There's no JavaScript. So if we go back to our orders and then track a different product, you'll notice that all of the tracking pages are the same. So we need to make each tracking page different depending on the order and the product. So how do we know which product to track on this page? To create this, we can use a feature called URL parameters. URL parameters let us save data directly in the URL. To create a URL parameter, at the top, after this URL, we're going to type question mark and then order capital ID equals 1, 2, 3, for example, and press enter. So the question mark means we're adding a URL parameter to this URL. So a parameter is a property value pair. The left side is a property and the right side is a value. This is sort of like an object like this. So using URL parameters, we can save some data in the URL like this. And then we can use JavaScript to get this data out of the URL. To do that, we'll go back to our code and we'll open our files here and we'll scroll down to the bottom to the tracking page. And let's scroll all the way down to the bottom. And at the bottom of the body, let's add a script tag to run some JavaScript. So we'll type less than script greater than. And to get the parameters out of the URL, we can use a built-in class called URL. First, let's generate an object using this class. We'll type new capital URL and brackets. And we'll give it the URL that we want to get the parameters from. So in here, we'll type window.location.href. Remember that window.location.href gets the URL at the top of the browser. And now let's save this object in a variable. At the front, we'll create const URL equals this object. So this URL class analyzes the URL that we give it and breaks it down into different parts. One of the parts are the URL parameters. To get the parameters, we're going to use the property URL dot search capital P params. By the way, URL parameters are also called search parameters because they're used for features like YouTube search. So search params will let us get the URL parameters up here. So let's say that we wanted the order ID parameter. Inside our code, search params has a method called .get brackets. And this lets us get individual parameters. So inside here, we'll give it a string and we'll get the order capital ID parameter out of the URL. So let's console.log this. Console.log and brackets. If we save and then open our project and go to the tracking page and then open the console, right click, inspect the console, you'll see that it gave us the order ID that we saved up here. So using that code, we can get URL parameters out of the URL at the top and then use them to create this page. We can also save multiple parameters in the URL. To save another parameter, at the end, we can just type and now we can give it another property value pair, like product capital ID equals 456, and press enter. And now inside our code, we can get this second parameter. So inside here, we're going to make a copy of this line, select it, right click, copy, and then down here, right click, paste. And this time, we're going to get the parameter product capital ID and save. If we open the page and open the console, we got the order ID as well as the product ID out of the URL. So URL parameters lets us save different data in each URL. And we can actually go back and forth between them. So if we click the back button, it will go to this URL, and this URL has different data or parameters saved inside. If we click forward, this URL has different parameters or data saved inside. And this is how YouTube search works. If we search for something, our search is saved as a URL parameter. If we search for something else, our search is also saved as a URL parameter, and we can go back and forth between the two. So this is actually all the data that we need to create the tracking page. We need to know which order it is and which product it is. Now there's one more thing to know to create this page. We'll go back to our code, and we're going to open the orders page at orders.html. And we're going to find the track package button using Control F or Command F. And we'll type the text in that button, track package. So notice that these buttons are just a link to the tracking page or tracking.html. So when you're generating this HTML, make sure that you add URL parameters after this tracking page URL using question mark, the order capital ID equals, and then you substitute the order ID like 1, 2, 3, and then also attach the product ID. Product capital ID equals 4, 5, 6. So when generating this HTML, make sure you substitute the order ID and product ID into this URL so that when it opens the tracking page, you know which order and which product to track. I'll leave generating the HTML and making the tracking page interactive as exercises. So now let's save this file and let's check our tests. So we'll open the browser and open the test tab, and everything is still working. And we'll save these changes into Git. Open the Git section. In orders.html, we added an example of adding URL parameters to the tracking page link. In tracking.html, we added an example of getting the parameters out of the URL at the top. Let's create a message describing these changes. Add URL parameters example and commit. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned what a backend is and how to make HTTP requests to the backend. We learned how to use XML HTTP request and fetch. We learned how to handle asynchronous code using callbacks, promises, and async await. We learned how to test asynchronous code. We learned about error handling for unexpected errors. We used the backend in our project, and we learned URL parameters. Before we look at the exercises, you might be wondering, what's the next step after this course? Instead of just using a backend, the next step is to learn how to create our own backend. To do that, you'll need to learn the command line. And after that, you'll learn a technology called Node.js, which lets us create our own backend. Also, after this course, you can learn how to put a website on the internet using this video right here. Here are some exercises that'll help you practice what we learned in this lesson. Thanks for watching. Here are some other videos and courses that you might be interested in. If you want to support this channel, you can click like, subscribe, and share this video with others. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.